Hi, I'm retired New York City Police Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page. Type in my name, Vic, Ferrari like the car, where you'll be able to preview all my NYPD books for free. They're $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download, and over my shoulder you can see what they look like. So be sure to check out my page. Before we get started this week, got a couple of things to talk about. We'll do the news and a couple of other things. But, you know, I've spoke about on this show a couple of times where I'm a huge proponent of cryotherapy. For me, I go to a place that's like a sauna. I go into this, it looks like a tank. It's usually about 150 degrees below zero. I go in there with a pair of shorts, no shirt, gloves, something for my ears, for 3.5 minutes, and it's great for inflammation. Well, today I made another new best friend. At my gym, they had one of these hydro chairs, and I've been going to the same gym now for probably about 2 years. I kind of jump around gyms. I get bored, or they get old, or they get dirty, or whatever. But this place has got this thing called a hydro chair. I was kind of reluctant to try it, but this big chair, you lay in it, and it's all computerized, and you push these buttons, and in your back, there's water flowing really hard, really fast, and it goes up and down your back. And oh my God, I mean, if you have the means to buy one or a gym that has one, I really encourage it. If you have any kind of back problems or leg issues, it's a hell of a massage. It's almost like going to get a massage and a hell of a lot cheaper. So let's go into the news. I like to talk about what's going on in New York City. I pulled newspaper articles from the New York Post and Daily News. This one stood out. It's called New York City bound flight cancels when passenger notices bolts on plane wing. I mean, you've got to be freaking kidding me, right? Is it not bad enough when you got to battle an airport, right? You got to get your bags checked. You got to hope the flight isn't canceled. You have to deal with the TSA, right? They're going through all your crap and making you throw out your water and everything. Then you get on the plane and you notice there's bolts missing on the wing. And it says a New York-bound Virgin Atlantic flight was canceled just moments before takeoff last week when an alarmed passenger said he spotted several screws missing from the plane's wing. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, they've really got to tighten up the aviation industry. I mean, something like that, I mean, it's just so obvious. You can't even believe that in today's society something like that would happen. But I'm glad that they caught it in time and nobody got hurt. Second story is Taylor Swift's alleged stalker seen being let out of an NYPD precinct in handcuffs seconds after arrest. So Taylor Swift has got a stalker. I think she lives somewhere in Tribeca or Lower Manhattan. Some guy that's been laying around, you got to see this guy. If you can just Google it and pull up the arrest photos, it's unfortunate, but, she's everywhere. And you would think, I mean, she's on, she's got her concert, she's on tour, and now whenever she's at a football game, whatever network is covering the game, they've got to go to the box every 15 minutes to show the world, her love for Travis Kelce. It's just a bit much. You think that maybe she might want to lay low for a while. I mean, you're putting yourself out there everywhere. It's just too much. And you've got some unemployed 30-year-old guy who probably lives with his parents, and he's sitting on his couch popping Prozac, gets a thing for her, and now he's hanging out around her building. If they arrested him, I'm sure it's probably not the first time he's been hanging around her building or has made overtures to get her attention, and probably they had him trespass from the building. And when that doesn't work and he's still hanging around, and it's probably a restraining order where he's not supposed to be within X amount of feet. The story didn't really go into it, but it's happened quite a bit in New York City. I've seen it. David Letterman notoriously had this stalker that was a female, and she used to go to his house up in Connecticut. She would go down to Rockefeller Plaza, where they used to tape the Tonight Show, and then later on the CBS version, I think the Ed Sullivan Theater. And she broke into his house a couple of times. And then eventually, it's sad, I mean, she was so mentally ill. I think she either fell asleep on railroad tracks somewhere in upstate New York or Connecticut, or she threw herself in front of a train. And, now he doesn't have that stalker problem anymore. Another one was there's a precinct in Manhattan. It's called the Hole in the Donut. It's the 2-6 precinct in Manhattan. It's on the west side. It's a very small precinct. It covers a couple of the New York City universities and colleges. And I remember one time I had an arrest because in auto crime, you bounce around quite a bit. You go to different precincts, and each precinct's got its own feel to it. And I remember walking in the precinct, and I'm in the muster room. And in a muster room in a New York City precinct, there's all sorts of crap on the walls, right? You've got wanted posters. There's the precinct club is having a trip to Yankee Stadium. There's all sorts of stuff. Or the commanding officer wants you to do this or that. I look on the wall, and there's a picture of this woman. And, it looked kind of odd. It kind of like looked thrown. It didn't really look like a real wanted poster. It looked like someone took a Polaroid of someone and then slapped it together on a legal sheet of paper. And the guy that's on ABC News now, what's his name? I think it's George. What the hell is his name? George Papadopoulos, the guy that was with the Clinton administration. Forgive me if I'm getting it wrong. He had a female stalker. And I remember that it was all over the precinct because he had this stalker, and if she was seen around his building, she was supposed to get arrested or chased from the area. But I remember that he had a stalker. But you see that quite a bit where some person gets fixated on this person. I mean, we saw what happened with poor Jodie Foster with that John Hinckley. So it's unfortunate we have these people. I mean, they need help, but until they get help, they make these celebrities' lives miserable because then you got to go through life looking over your shoulder. The next story is a New York City rookie cop in the police academy was busted early Thursday for patronizing a prostitute in Brooklyn. D'Angelo Pena, 26 years old, was issued a desk appearance ticket release. Well, first of all, he's really lucky they gave him a desk appearance or disappearance ticket because the NYPD, when one of its members screws up, you get all the benefits of everybody else. So rarely does when a New York City cop gets locked up for anything, they give you a desk appearance ticket because otherwise you got to go through the system with everybody else. So say for this happened in Brooklyn, he would have to go to Brooklyn Central Booking like everybody else. He'd sit in a jail cell or the bullpens down in the basement until he got called up, which can take days. Then you got a lawyer and everything. But they gave him a desk appearance ticket and he was released. So I'm going to guess. I mean, things have changed, but I'm sure the New York City Police Department with this, he's going to get fired. You can't, you get arrested, anything in your background turns up. When you get hired in the NYPD, it's a 2-year probationary period. If you omitted any information or something comes up in your background, you're gone. So this guy just cost himself a job. I can't believe at 26 years old, you got this great job coming up and he's driving around looking for a blowjob. It makes no sense. In New York City, the Vice unit used to handle it. They have this thing called losing proposition. And what Vice would do is they would get female detectives. They would go into neighborhoods where prostitution was rampant, and you get the female detectives, and they would hang around, and guys would pull up, and then they'd make overtures. And if they crossed a certain threshold or talked about money or something, there was like a whole criteria that it's not entrapment. And then they would swing in and make the arrest. And then the precincts got involved in it too. So now not only do you have Vice doing it, you have the precincts will go out and they'll get, a lieutenant and a bunch of female cops and, a field team to make the arrests. And again, it was called Operation Losing Proposition. But it's funny. I mean, I worked in the Bronx in the 1980s. And the 4-1 precinct, which was at one time called Fort Apache, then it became Little House on the Prairie. The whole area of Hunts Point, the lower end, is all industrial. It's factories. And what happens is after 5 o'clock at night, the whole place just closes down, just warehouses. And, after 7, 8 o'clock at night, it became pimps and hoes. And when I tell you in the 80s and early 90s, before they really got a handle of it, and this is right in the middle of AIDS was, everybody knew about AIDS. Everybody was getting AIDS. Didn't stop these guys from going down to Hunts Point for a quickie. And it was so bad down there, like on any given night, you'd have 20, 30 women easily just floating around. And I mean, it's not like they weren't like the girls from the 1982 film Night Shift. Okay. It was like, women with open scabs and missing teeth and, just really fucked up. And the 4-1 precinct, what they would do is, they had the prostitution team, and it was a van. And the van would drive around and round up these hookers, like 15, 20 at a time. And it was so funny because, like, we'd be driving around there looking for drunk drivers, because drunk driving and prostitution goes hand in hand, because you would have to be out of your mind and drunk driving to go down there looking for sex with these women. So we used to pick off the drunk, horny guys that would go down there looking to get taken care of. But you would see these women running around, like they would run out of their shoes, running down. Like, we weren't looking for the prostitutes, but you'd see them like running from the vans. So it was actually pretty funny. Oh, and back to this kid that's getting fired. So the amount of scrutiny that goes into getting hired with the NYPD, you're filling out a ton of paperwork, and like I said, they do a very thorough background check. And what I was noticing as a detective in organized crime, like my last 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden it just seemed like every couple of months I was getting a phone call from the NYPD's police applicant investigation unit who does these background checks. And I'd get a phone call and they'd say, do you know Diego Murray? Did you locked up this guy in 1987 or whatever, 1989? I'm like, no. Well, could you find out? So then I would go through my records and then I'd pull the report and stuff. Let me get back to you. Then I would call up this investor and go, what's up? He goes, well, he's trying to come on the job. He's trying to get hired by the NYPD. And he said he was in the back seat of a car. He didn't know it was stolen. So I'm looking at the paperwork and I'm like, no, he was the driver. The lock was punched and he had a screwdriver in his pocket. So the NYPD had better be careful, because this happened once before. They had massive layoffs in the 70s. Then they went back to hiring. And they were hiring a lot of people that shouldn't have been hired. And that's, that fuels police corruption. It fuels police brutality. And it's a black eye for law enforcement. So I hope the NYPD gets a handle on it. And this story is really sad. And this is kind of lead into my stories for today. You got a woman out in Brooklyn. She's a 58-year-old mother. She lives in the housing projects out in Starrett City, Brooklyn. Her 36-year-old son, whatever happened, stabs her to death and throws her dog out the window. I mean, there's a special place in hell for somebody like that. I mean, is it not bad enough that you kill your poor mother and then you've got to throw her dog out the window? And I can't imagine someone doing like to turn on your mother. And when you stab somebody, I mean, there's a lot of hate. As far as, it's one thing to shoot somebody, but when you're going to stab them to death, it's up close and personal. And you see a lot of that with lovers or people that know each other. For whatever reason, they pick a knife. I don't know why, but it's evil. And this poor woman was stabbed to death and her dog got thrown out a window. So that leads us to this week. I'm going to tell a couple of animal stories. Everybody loves animals, right? So my first story is, it's the early 90s, and the NYPD had this thing called BAND in certain precincts in the Bronx. And it was called BAND, Bronx Anti-Narcotic Drive. And what they would do is they would take cops in field training and they would sprinkle them or saturate neighborhoods in drug-prone locations. And it wasn't like anything undercover or anything. These cops were in uniform, but they wanted an omnipresence, right, where everywhere these drug dealers looked, there was a cop standing on every corner. And they were told, no congregating on the corners. Someone's coming out of a building, they look suspicious. Introduce yourself. Make the drug dealers uncomfortable legally. And some cops did, some cops didn't. But in this particular case, there was this cop, and he has this foot post, and he's doing his job. He's chasing the drug dealers off the street. He's only leaving his post for his meal hour. He's doing warrant checks. He's making arrests. He's doing his job. Well, doing his job puts a cramp in the drug dealer's business. So they will push back sometimes, depends on the neighborhood. Some drug dealers will move off. Other ones will push back. They'll take a shot at you or throw something off the roof at you. So one day this cop is standing on his foot post, and if you ever notice, you'll always see cops with their back against the wall or in the subway against the pillar. There's a reason for that, because you don't want anybody sneaking up on you, coming up from behind you. So this cop's got his back against the wall. He's standing there and he's looking at his watch, and it's almost 1 o'clock. And you know what? I'm going to go on my meal hour. The cop takes a step off the building. He gets about 3 feet and he hears a scream and an explosion hit right near him. So he jumps and he goes, what the hell is that? He looks to the ground and there's a cat. Somebody threw a cat off the roof at him and it explodes all over the floor. So meow, boom, right? He's a young cop, scares the shit out of him. He jumps on the radio. He calls a 1013. Officer needs assistance. And he goes into an alleyway because he doesn't know, is there more airmail going to come off the building at him? The next thing you know, the 4-6, different precincts are known for different things. The 4-6 precinct in the South Bronx, when I was there, you got on that radio when you called for help, 4-4 precinct 2, 4-7. I mean, there's a lot of them. I don't want to leave anybody out, but there were certain precincts better than others, and they put out more cars than others because the precinct was so busy. But the 4-6 was like one of those places where you got on the radio and you had a problem. The cavalry was coming directly. So what happens is everybody's pulling up, cops are getting out, and you're getting these old-time cops, and they see the dead cat. They're putting two together, and cops have a dark gallows humor. They're laughing. So this rookie cop must have been a pain in the ass to his sergeant because he called him a lot, because he had a lot of questions, because he was doing his job. And the sergeant rolls up, and he says, "What's up?" And he goes, he's pointing. He goes, they threw a cat. They threw a cat off the roof at me. And the sergeant goes, "Yeah, I see that." And he goes, they threw the cat. And he goes, "Yeah, you said. What do you want me to do about it?" So now the cop takes a step back and goes, "What do you mean what do you want me to do about it?" He says, "Do I look like," he goes, "am I dressed in green? Does this shirt say Department of Sanitation?" And the rookie cop looks at him. He goes, "No." He goes, "Well, then get on the radio and call Department of Sanitation and leave me alone." And the sergeant drove off. And that would happen. I mean, some of those supervisors back in the day, you were expected to figure it out. And if they thought you were a pain in the ass, they'd leave you out there and let you figure it out on your own. So that's a story in my book. I think the NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crime, and Chaos. It's called Cat Off a Hot Tin Roof. There's way more to that story, but I'm just kind of boiling it down for you. Another story with animals. So it's the early 90s, and the NYPD is starting to make the changeover from the 6-shot wheel guns, the 38 revolvers. We're starting to go to 9mm. And the department, you couldn't just go out and buy a 9mm. There was certain guns. There was the Glock, a Sig Sauer. There was a couple of others. I'm not really a gun guy, anyway, the NYPD is starting to go. You would go for training for a couple of days, and you could keep your 38, but now you've got a new 9mm. So some of the specialized units like narcotics, we were getting them faster than patrol. I guess it was like a pilot program. So one of the guys in this team in narcotics got a new 9mm. And cops are just like kids. It's the same thing as kids in a sandbox. You got a red pail, I got a blue pail. Everybody's like, "Ooh, let me see, can I see?" Like, I just remember in the office, this guy, he was one of the first guys to have the 9mm. Everybody's looking at the thing, right? So he was part of this team, and it's in one of my books called The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. I mean, these guys, they were good cops, but it always just seemed like there was a problem with that team. And it was definitely supervision, because their boss actually later on got fired. He went to Jamaica and came back from Jamaica and got drug tested and tested positive for ganja, and he was out the door. But anyway, what happens is this cop's got this new 9mm, and we're doing a buy and bust operation up in Spanish Harlem. And basically you send an undercover out. He buys a couple of decks of heroin or a couple of vials of coke. And he gets back in the car, he gives you the description, the whole field team rolls up and you grab the guy. So we're rolling up, and this guy takes off, and everyone's chasing this guy through cars. And I don't know if he let go of a pit bull or someone let go of a pit bull, but there was a pit bull involved. Maybe the pit bull just saw a bunch of morons running around. And the pit bull starts chasing the cops around. It didn't bite anybody, but you see a pit bull running around barking. It is cause for concern. Well, what this cop does is he climbs on the back of a car, he runs up the back of a car, out comes this 9mm, and he's just spraying shots. Well, you're shooting at the dog into the ground. What happens when a bullet hits the sidewalk, you ask, or the street? It hits and goes bing, it hugs the curb. So it's going to ricochet, and it can hurt someone, it can kill somebody, even if on a ricochet, right? So this cop jumps up on the back of an old car, and he starts popping shots at the dog. Everybody's running for their lives. The dog takes off. And P.S., never found the dog. Dog was never found. We don't know if there was blood, but they never found the dog. So he probably hit the dog, but no one ever found the dog. No one got hit. Duty captain came. Major investigation. That almost probably, I would guess, somewhere in the bowels of 1PP, the Puzzle Palace, there was discussion of, do we really want these guys to have 9mm after something like this happened? But everybody was okay. But, things happen. Another dog story or pet story was probably about the mid-90s. I'm driving around in the Riverdale section of the Bronx, up by the reservoir on Sedgwick Avenue. It's a beautiful old neighborhood, and there's an old reservoir up there opposite Lehman College. And it was probably summer, late spring, and we had a very heavy downpour for probably a good 45 minutes. Just probably got like 2 inches of rain in 45 minutes. Just came down. And we're driving down the street, and there's an older man, and he's standing there, and there's a big dog. I forget what it was, but it was big. I don't know. It was a big hairy dog. I just forget. And the dog is on its side. So we pull up, and the guy is crying, and he's upset. And I go, "What's wrong?" He goes, "My dog just dropped dead." And I said, "Here?" Like right in the middle of the street, right in the middle of Sedgwick Avenue. And in New York, you'll see sometimes there's these metal electric boxes in the street. It's the weirdest thing in the world. Like you'll have a paved road, and then you'll drive over like this flat electric box. And I'm sure someone that's listening to this works for Con Ed. I know I'm using the wrong terminology, but you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, water had pooled on top of this electric box on the street. And as the guy is walking his dog, the dog walks through the puddle, and he said he heard a yelp, and the dog just fell over on its side. And we could smell burnt hair. So I said, "Holy shit." I says, "I'll bet you got electrocuted." And the guy had a leather leash, so thank God, because otherwise would have went right up the links of the leash and electrocuted him. So we call Con Edison, right? So we kind of put out barriers and flares and stuff because you don't want to take any chances. You don't want somebody else to go, in there. And Con Ed shows up, and they're laughing at us. And the guy goes, "There is absolutely no way that water has been electrified." And he's giving me how it's insulated and all this crap. And I'm like, "Well, could you just see?" And the guy reluctantly gets out of this Con Ed truck, and he's got like a test light thing. And he drops it in the water, and the light goes on. He goes, "Holy shit." P.S. We had to close down the whole block, and these guys had to shut power off to that electrical box. I think it turned off power in a couple other places, and they had to fix it. So do yourself a favor in New York. If you're walking and you see one of those electrical boxes, play it safe. Don't walk over them, because I saw a dog get electrocuted in one of those things. Oh, all right. So this is a sad story, but it's kind of funny. So in the NYPD, there's this thing called the mail run. So just say, for argument's sake, in the Bronx, there's 12 precincts, right? All the mail and notifications come from one police plaza, and then they get farmed out. It's like the mail system, just the regular mail system. It gets farmed out to each borough. And every Thursday, I don't know if it's every day, well, I know every Thursday because that's payday, but probably every day there's a mail run. A precinct will send 2 cops to the borough, and the borough will give them the precinct mail. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll have 2 precinct cops do the whole borough mail run. So there was this cop in my precinct, wasn't a bad guy. He's tasked with going to the borough, picking up the mail, and he's dropping off the mail at all these precincts. And one of the stops he has to go to is the NYPD's harbor unit in the Bronx. Each borough has its own, I think it's called a harbor launch. And the NYPD's harbor unit in the Bronx is in the South Bronx in the 40 precinct. It is in the middle of nowhere. It's like a forgotten land over there. It's like old abandoned factories, and actually we had a tugboat strike there like many years ago, but there's nothing there. You wouldn't even know the NYPD's harbor unit is there if you drove on the block. So anyway, I guess they gave him directions, and the cop shows up with this satchel of mail, and he gets out of his blue and white police car, and he starts walking. There's a bit of a walk to get to the boathouse or whatever you want to call it. And as he's walking, a dog jumps up and starts barking his head off and approaches him. The cop panics, drops the mail, and puts 1 or 2 into the dog. Well, it's the harbor unit's dog. And needless to say, the harbor unit got pissed. They wanted to kick the guy's ass. And then the duty captain got involved. He had to write a 49, which is an explanation of what happened. It goes to one police plaza. P.S. That cop was never allowed to do the mail run again. Speaking of mascots, Some precincts, they're not supposed to have animals. And I'm sure nowadays it is like forbidden. But back then, some precincts had mascots. Sometimes they were like emotionally disturbed people that hung around the precinct. And we'll go into that in another episode because each precinct's got people that hang around that aren't right. But then the cops kind of take care of them. But Highway 1 in the Bronx, our highway unit, they're the guys that go out and do the escorts for the presidential, anything where you see like lights and sirens and motorcycles. They also patrol New York City highways. They do the vehicle accident, when accidents were seriously injured, likely to die, drunk driving, the roads. So their building was on the Bronx River Parkway in the Bronx, and it's called Highway 1. Well, back in the old days, when you made a drunk driving arrest, you had to bring your prisoner to Highway 1, and the highway cops would put him on the breathalyzer. It's special training, so whenever you had a drunk driving arrest in the Bronx, you had to bring him to Highway 1. So the highway unit had this old dog, and they called him Harley, for Harley Davidson, because it's the motorcycle unit, and highway cops drive around in Harley Davidson motorcycles. So Harley, it was the funniest thing. When you would walk in with a prisoner, Harley would never bark at anybody in uniform. If someone came in there running their mouth or something, or even sometimes just they were quiet, the dog would come running up to him and bark. He never bit anybody to my knowledge, but it was the funniest thing in the world. If you walked in there in uniform, Dog would just come up to you and wag his tail. If you weren't in uniform, the dog would bark his head off. So they're pretty smart. They're pretty smart animals. The last NYPD story is snow blizzard of 95. I was working in the Bronx Task Force Auto Loss in a unit. We turned out of the old 4-4 precinct in the Bronx. So if you're ever going down the Major Deegan Expressway going to a Yankee game, just before you get to Yankee Stadium, you'll see a precinct right there. That's the old 4-4 precinct, and then they moved up to River Avenue. And when they vacated, we took over the building. It's right alongside the Bronx River, Major Deegan Expressway. So it's about 1995, and we have this tremendous snowstorm. But cops still have to come into work, right? It's you don't get snow days. They tell you figure it out, take public transportation, walk. So my partner and I, we get to the building, about 7 o'clock in the morning. The whole street is completely snowed in. All the police cars are snowed in because the snow plows come by and push snow against the parked cars. So we were grabbing shovels, and I don't know what it was, but that particular day, my partner and I got a police van to use. And we were going to take the police van to a gas station and get the snow chains put on. So my partner and I are digging this van out, and the snow had pushed up underneath the van. And as I'm digging the snow out from underneath the van, this chow's head pops out of a hole underneath the van. I'm like, what the hell? And I'm looking at it, and the dog is like, woof, 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 like not barking, but, happy that we got him out of there. So we dig him out. The dog is so happy that we dug him out. What happened was, during the snowstorm the night before, he went under the van, and it started snowing, and the plows kept going by, and they buried him underneath the van, and he was so happy. And one of the female cops that worked in clerical took the dog, and he had a big head like a teddy bear, and she named him Teddy, and she gave the dog to her kids. So enough of these NYPD stories. What this segment is Vic's Picks. The NFL playoffs are coming to an end. We're at the championship games. I'm going to take the Ravens, and I'm giving 3 to Taylor Swift and the Chiefs. And I'm going to go rogue here, and I'm taking the Lions. I think San Francisco's going to win outright, but I'm going to take the Lions and 7.5. I definitely think it's going to be a lot closer than people think, although I do think San Francisco's going to win. As always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Tacoma, Washington, New Rochelle, New York, Jersey City, New Jersey, Reston, Virginia, which is home to that movie, The Hot Zone. That Reston, Virginia is where the government brought in these monkeys that had Ebola virus, and a couple of them escaped in the lab, and then they had to wind up killing the monkeys in this facility in Reston, Virginia, and then Hollywood got a hold of the idea from the book, The Hot Zone, and made a movie about it with Dustin Hoffman. I personally think the book is a hell of a lot better than the movie, but that's oftentimes. Wantagh, Long Island, and Westbury, Long Island, home of Cornet, 1111 Old Country Road in Westbury, where you'll find no talking orangutans. That was a commercial from when I was a kid. There was this place that used to sell bassinets and stuff, and when I saw Westbury, I thought of Coronet. They're out of business now. I looked it up. And, of course, my friends in Arab, Alabama, yes, that is a real place. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background or would like to be a guest on the show, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram, or you can follow me there too, at VicFerrari50. Again, if you enjoy the content, please go to my Amazon author page and check out my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download, and shamelessly, I'm going to show my book cover for my latest book, NYPD, Laughing in the Line of Duty. It's selling quite well, and I appreciate it because I know this podcast is fueling it, and I want to thank everybody again for supporting me. I will be back next week. Take care, and bye-bye.